A simple story, but not a silly story, as originally kind of played out by many outlets, where we're talking about fonts. Fonts are actually a bit more important than you may think. And here's the part where Secretary of State Marco Rubio is basically standing up for the rights to have a professional font by officially ending the department's use of Calibri font, restoring the use of Times New Roman to all standard typefaces for the diplomatic cables, all the memos, and all internal correspondences. Everyone will be using Times New Roman going forward. Now, the State Department's memo, which basically outlined confirming multiple news outlets reporting on this, which seemed like a very serious, silly story, serious and silly at the same time, and explains that the switch is part of a broader rollback of Biden-era administrative and diversity-related policies that emphasize accessibility and readability standards. So that's where it gets complicated from the simple part. Calibri replaced Times New Roman in 2023 for accessibility reasons, but Rubio's office says the former choice reflected, quote, ideological preferences, unquote, not actual operational needs for users in the departments. Now, his office has framed the typeface decision as part of what it calls a reset of, quote, non-mission critical DEI initiatives, unquote, implemented under the prior administration. State Department officials told reporters that the original switch to Calibri was justified partly on accessibility studies, but was also linked to efforts to, another quote here, standardize inclusive design, unquote. Basically look more like the rest of the world in how designs things are done online. Now, Rubio's team argues that the Times New Roman is more widely compatible with global diplomatic systems and reflects another, quote, continuity and professionalism, unquote, suggesting that the new policy is much more symbolic as it is functional as well. Let's talk about typology, because it actually is a really important thing. The choices you make in your fonts may seem minor, but in federal agencies, they often reflect broader operational philosophies. Calibri, for example, is a sans serif modern font. That means without serif, without tails, and was adopted during Biden for administration for readability on screens and compliance with accessibility research. For many places, many people, many computers, if you will, have ideas for accessibility for people who don't read so well, can't see so good, that it makes these fonts easier to be read and seen on screens and in some print as well. Times New Roman, the serif font historically used in diplomatic cables, looks a lot like typewriters but isn't, is associated with formal traditional governments and communication. Analysts say that the debate echoes earlier fights over email signatures, formatting, and another quote, bureaucratic identity. What you put in your signatures, and this isn't even going back and forth to pronouns, and how you look as a professional when you send things out as official cables and official emails. Small aesthetic standards end up representing much larger political disagreements when you like to do something a little special with your fonts in your email signatures, which is where this fight really does begin. Employee reaction appears mixed. Some career foreign service officers have welcomed the move as a return to visually familiar diplomatic standards that have been used for decades. Others express frustration, telling reporters the debate over fonts is a distraction from more urgent staffing and security issues, i.e., we kind of need more people working here. The fonts aren't going to do anything but change the look of the paperwork. That's not a quote, but it ought to be. Accessibility advocates note that many visually impaired readers find sans serif fonts more legible, and cautioning that the department not to reverse the improvements unintentionally, because there are consequences to these changes. Public reaction online has ranged from humor to criticism, some viewing the move as part of a growing culture war trend. Because we have to fight over something, why not fight over DEI fonts? Why not? Policy analysts say typographical choices can serve as another quote, administrative signaling, unquote, conveying how an agency wants to operate and present itself. Under Biden, design guidelines that emphasize accessibility, user-centered language, and modernization. Rubio's return to Times New Roman is being interpreted as a shift towards traditionalism, hierarchy clarity, and a rollback of certain DEI-branded reforms. Whether the practical effects will be meaningful remains unclear, but symbolically, the move reflects the administration's effort to mark a clean break in style, tone, and bureaucratic identity. So, pros for the change: restores a widely recognized, globally compatible diplomatic standard. cost nothing to implement, and may simply interoperability with older diplomatic systems, may simplify interoperability, make things work better with the old systems, if you will, and signals a clear administrative preference to traditional formatting and consistency. On the other side, may be viewed as politicizing a low-stakes administrative decision, could decrease accessibility for some users who read more easily with the sans serif fonts, and it risks appearing symbolic rather than substance in the face of larger foreign policy changes. What say you on the font? The font front? What say you on these fonts? Let us know in the comments.